Okay, hi. I almost didn't want to start this workshop because I was having such a good time with the interpreter. But hello, I'm Kathy Baldock. I live in Reno, Nevada. I'm a straight ally. I've been associated with GCN QCF since 2007. I think I was one of the very first straight allies to ever go to the conference. And all of this has come about because of a relationship with a fellow hiker, Netta Montoya. She's a story I've told many times. I'm going to skip it here. But sometimes people ask, are you LGBTQ? No, I'm like a total heterosexual. But but that works well because people will see that I have no agenda. Actually, I have two children. I've got that one, Sam, she's 33, she lives in New York City, and I've got that one, Andrew, he's 35, and he lives at Lake Tahoe. Both my children are heterosexual too. We're just a bunch of like really vanilla people. So this session is challenging for me to do because typically I will speak for 8 hours and I have been given 50 minutes with lots of new information. So, hang on. If you have questions, I would really appreciate if you would put them with capital letters questions so at the end I can find them and answer them. I'm thinking of doing a community hangout later to answer your questions, but I'm going to zip. I'm going to go through this because I want to get to the punchline. And look at you, Phil. Look at you working away there. There you go. So anyway, there are 6 passages in the Bible that are sometimes used to condemn homosexuality and homosexual relationships. But the Bible, when translated accurately in its intended meaning, says nothing, zero, nothing about homosexuality. And it also says nothing about heterosexuality. Our focus verse for this session, though, is just one verse, one of those 6 verses. It's 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10, where the word homosexual was first used in any version of the Bible, in any language. And we're going to trace this verse through history, the intended meaning at the time, its original meaning, and then we're going to get to the 1930s and we're going to kind of plant ourselves for a little while in the 1930s when that translation work was done. And then we're going to look at the revised standard version of the Bible where the word homosexual first appeared, and I'm going to let you know how it got in there. And then we're going to look at the RSV revision because it was revised in 1971. But we're also going to look at other versions of the Bible that used the RSV as their base text. So we're going to try to understand how Scripture, then, according to the name of this workshop, has been used as a sacred weapon against the LGBTQ community. So 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10, as I said, is our focus verse, and we're only going to work on that verse today. It says that people that do immoral behaviors, and we're told which sins those immoral behaviors are going to, those people that do those things are going to be kept from going to heaven. Amongst the people on that list are the immoral, makes sense, the idolaters, the adulterers, those who are greedy, drunks, robbers, and this is an interesting word, revilers. And that's interesting because what it really means is those that use contemptuous language against others. And if you have successfully made it through the pandemic and the election verifications over and over and over, and the Georgia election and the coup without reviling others, then like good on you, but the rest of us, according to this verse, we're going to hell. So that's a struggle in itself. There are 2 other kinds of people on that list. Let me get to my screen share. There are 2 other kinds of people on that list. And let's start by looking at the Greek words for those people that are on the list. When Paul wrote this, he wrote this in about 50, the year 50. So here we go. We're going to look at this. And let me go to the next screen. Whoop, one sec. Clunky, clunky. Okay. Our focus passage for this, as I said, is 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10. And it lists the people that are unrighteous who will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And included on this list are two Greek words representing people who do immoral behaviors, the malakoi and the arsenokoitai. Okay, first, the malakoi. There's an ancient meaning to malakoi. We're not going to look at the modern translations for a while. We're going to stick with the ancient meanings. If it's referring to clothing or objects, the word malakoi can mean softness, softness like expensive clothing or rich food or gentle breezes. If it refers to men, these words are only going to refer to men. They are men that live their lives of luxury. They avoid hard work. They're weak in battle. They drink too much. They eat too many good foods. They have too much sex. They pretty themselves up to attract women. So when they have too much sex, it's not talking about too much sex strictly with men. When it's used as a term of moral character, it denotes laziness, degeneracy, a lack of courage, decadence, or in one word, if you want to sum up all those immoral characteristics, you say that person is feminine. So malakoi does not mean a person who is penetrated. There was a word for that. And it also does not mean a man who strictly was having sex with a boy. There's a word for that too. It's thought that, it's a malakoi person, backtrack a second, a malakoi person may have had sex with a male or a female. This is not just a word that means men who have sex with men. And it's a very difficult translation in modern day because it means having feminine qualities. So we're going to try to bring it into modern days, but it does not mean being the bottom in a male-male sexual relationship. It does not mean being the penetrated one. Again, it relates to the characteristics of being female. It has no relation to the partner, the sex of the partner in a sexual relationship. Again, it has to do with having feminine traits, lazy, lack of courage, generally immoral, excessively indulgent. And these will seem very foreign to us to be labeled as feminine characteristics. But in the ancient world, this is the way it was. It's the view of what feminine was at that time. So you're going to see this is going to be very challenging in itself to translate into modern language. The closest way of translating it might be to say a person of poor moral character. That's probably the closest thing to translate it to today. So I want to come back here. So the second word is going to be more difficult to understand, even in ancient context. Paul was addressing a church in Corinth in around this year 50 that was filled with Jewish converts and new converts, new pagan converts to Christianity. So he looks at this church, he identifies a behavior that's going on there that he wants to speak to them about, and he has no word. Although this word arsenokoitai literally means man better, we don't know exactly what it means. And anyone that tells you that they know, they have the special information about what this word exactly means, they're not being good scholars. They're not being good academics. Because all through history, in that period of time, around the six centuries, where this word was being used in Greek, there's less than 80 times that we find this word in any kind of literature, not just the Bible, but in any kind of literature. And the way we can tell what this word might mean is we look at it in lists where it might appear, because that's the only time we see it is in lists. We don't see arsenokoitai, M dash, this is what it means. We never see that. We just see it in lists. So we can make guesses, but we do know that we look at it in context of where we see it in lists. We don't see it in lists where there are sex vices like pederasty or incest. We don't see it in those lists. Where we see it in lists are lists that have to do with injustice or exploitative acts, economic injustice. So we're going to try to discern what this word might mean. Um, it's so as I see, let me go to the screen share again. Oh, there we go. Delay. So again, it doesn't appear in the list where there's sex vices. It's grouped with sins of exploitation and economic injustice. So we know the word refers to some sort of exploitation of sex associated with money. It's likely that it's related to prostitution or pimping or sex by force or coercion, with some kind of money or economic exchange going on here. But we do know it's an abusive behavior. Translating it as men who have sex with men or as the word homosexual removes those other characteristics of the word, the coercion, the exploitation, the abuse. If we just translate it to homosexual, all of those other pieces hanging off the word arsenokoitai are no longer there. Back to me. Uh, on me? Yes, I think we are. We are. Thank you for telling me because I can't see. So it would never have meant a man having sex with a man of equal status. Not in that culture. It never would have meant that. Paul again is specifically addressing a very specific immoral behavior that he is seeing that we don't know what it is. And the definition I most like is by Dr. Dale Martin, a New Testament scholar from Yale University that actually Ed and I got to meet while we were there. So exciting. He says that he thinks the most probable meaning of this word is kind of a two-way relationship, a two-way abuse, like an older person with status gets his sex needs met with a younger person, and a younger person gets their need for social climbing met. So it's a two-way. Both parties in this exchange are using one another for economic social gain. And that actually makes some of the most sense to me. So to understand these differences between male and female in the ancient world, we have to get a better grasp of what it is to be male and female and feminine and masculine. So, ladies, okay, get ready to get angry. By the time Paul had written First Corinthians, patriarchy had already been entrenched in societies for about 8,000 years at this point. So since the agricultural revolution, 10,000 years ago to us, people started gathering together in bands and tribes. And the women sort of became the caretakers of the children and the gatherers around the camp. And the men went out and hunted. And it has always been this way. Well, until the 1950s, it started to shift. 1950s, imagine, until the 1950s, where he who brings home the bacon has the power. And the man would bring home the meat, and gradually he became the one that held the power. But it wasn't just the power like a political power or governance power. It was power and authority in every area of life. And not just public life, private life too. So men were superior in intellect, in power, and in sex. In the ancient world, and frankly, far beyond it, the worst way a man could behave, and I'm going to say the years on this might be all the way up to the beginning of the 20th century. The worst way that a man could behave or to be perceived as would have been to be feminine or to have the traits of a woman. So remember what we looked at as the traits of a woman. She's lazy, she's lustful, she has zero self-control. So female subordination and inferiority goes far beyond just character traits or immoral traits. It also goes to the body. So the ancients, and this was set in stone, sort of, by the 4th century all the way to the 18th century. Well, it starts to shift in about the 17th century, but there was this perception that they didn't understand anatomically what bodies were. They believed that the body was made up of four different kinds of liquids: green bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. And the balance or imbalance of those things are what made you male or female. Male bodies were basically mirrored inside out in the female body. So these imbalances of fluids are what made a person male or female. So, of course, the better way to be was to be male. And to be male, you were hot and you were hot and dry. So because that's the balance of these humors, they made you hot and dry as opposed to women who were cold and wet. And because men were hot and dry, they could, their bodies could drive their blood up, drive it up, and drive it up so much that it made their shoulders broad and it made them strong. And as the blood was also driven up to the brain, it made them smarter. And because women were cold and wet, they just could not drive that up, and they ended up with big hips. And because their blood wasn't going to the brain, they were not as intellectually smart as men. So it's this is the view of male and female. So, pardon me, men had admirable traits. Oh, here's my cup. You know, like this, the patriarchy isn't going to fight itself. There you go. That's what I endeavor to do every day. To be male was to have courage and virility and self-control and intellect. And again, conversely, women were morally weak. They were given to unnatural vices. They were lazy. They were unchaste. They were lustful. They were whorish. They were impure. And they took the submissive, penetrated role in sex. Now, remember I said it was thought that a female body was the inverse of a male body anatomically. All the same pieces, but on the inside. And the reason they were on the inside is because she was cold. So all that stuff had to be kept on the inside, but a man being warm, all his stuff hangs on the outside. Makes sense in the 4th century to the 16th century. It makes total sense. So men, because of their heat, could heat up their blood and get rid of that excess blood through semen. Semen is actually heated up blood, but women, poor women, they didn't have the heat to do that. So every month they had to bleed to get rid of their excess blood because their biles, their humors were out of balance. Women, in their desire to be more like men, wanted to get that semen. They needed to be penetrated by men. So there was this natural inclination that women wanted to be penetrated by men so they could become more perfect versions of a human. So a man was expected to be aggressively demonstrate his superiority over others in the battlefield, in the home, and in the bedroom. So it was common for a Greek or a Roman man. So we're talking about when Paul wrote this book in the 1st century, right? To be attracted to both males and females. But we wouldn't have never called that bisexual at the time. That's a modern term. But sex was about dominion and power over another person. Sex was something you did to someone, not with someone. So sex, and I'm intentionally not saying relationships, because there's no relationship going on. It's very transactional. There's not two people associated with this. This is what a man wants to do. A man gets to do what a man wants to do. And a real man would never have taken pleasure or would have wanted to be in the passive role in sex, because that would have meant that another person was taking control of his body. Now, sex between men would have happened with an adolescent boy before he reached some kind of maturity where his body got hairy, where his facial hairs came in, where his body and pubic hairs came in. He was actually, for many lengths of time, considered more attractive than a beautiful woman. Probably some of you gay men are saying, yeah, well, not to me. Men So sex between men and an adolescent boy until he became a young man. Men had prostitutes for pleasure, mistresses for daily servicing, and wives for creating legitimate heirs. This was their life. This was their culture. So to be feminine female was to be inferior and penetrated. To be masculine male was to be superior and penetrate. Further, being a good citizen meant you use self control in all aspects of your life. So, sex was to be towards procreation, towards baby making. And we're going to see that sex is going to become, procreative sex is going to become increasingly more important, particularly after the 4th century. So, this ancient system of patriarchy and views about women form an inextricable backdrop to the meaning of Malakos. So, these words are difficult to directly translate into modern language. We're going to see that people make lots of mistakes over time. In the end, I'm going to suggest some good translations, but nobody's given me a Bible yet to do, the Kathy translation of the Bible. Yay, good. In the early years of Christianity, interestingly, celibacy for all was more honorable than marriage until about the 4th century, when they realized the second coming of Christ wasn't going to be happening real soon. So, like, plan B, how do you grow a church if nobody's having babies? So it was time to shift. So now sex became permissible um, for the for the purposes of procreation, and a high value was placed on procreative sex at that point. Anything that could not potentially result in procreation was forbidden. So, and it was immoral and sinful. So, consistent through much of church history and cultural history, good sex and bad sex. Let's go to this. Next one. Oops, where did my good sex and bad sex go? Oh, you know what? I'm going to come back to this one. Somehow I forgot it. This is really interesting. So, Malakoi and arsenokoitai are understood as sinful behaviors because we've gone over very briefly the definitions of these words. In my workshop notes, you're going to find some links to these more at length, but they're been understood as sinful behaviors involving immoral character or exploitative use and abuse of others, which any man was capable of. There's no sexual orientation built into this. And these are directed at men. If a man used, abused sex, and had immoral character, that's who is being spoken of in these verses. And for 1900 years, that is how these verses were understood. And then only in the last 75 years, Malakoi and arsenokoitai were combined into one word, homosexual, which includes women. Women are included this. I hope in the last 15, 20 minutes, you've already surmised that these verses were never addressing the behavior of women. These are addressing the behavior of men. But when you make this word homosexual, that includes women. Or these words are left as two words and translated, but they're always talking about the participants in male-male sex, ranging from prostitution to, in the ESV, consensual sex. So through most of history, and again, actually almost to the 1950s, good sex was male dominant. The male sexually penetrates and is on top. That becomes important to some people because if a woman is on top, that was a deviant sex act. Passions and desires are controlled. Procreative sex had to have the potential to make babies. Bad sex is a man is not dominant, so somewhere a man is being penetrated. Passions and desires are not controlled. They're lustful and they're non-procreative. Come back to me. So during much now, I said it's going to change in the 4th century when they realize Jesus isn't coming back real soon. We got to make some new rules. So during much of the Middle Ages, from the 5th to the 15th century, even, even good sex was to be avoided like the plague. Having sex with your wife for the sake of pleasure was a mortal sin. You could only have church sanctioned sex about 50 days a year. In the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, who's one of the greatest theologians in the Catholic Church, said that any sex act that was not procreated contradicted human nature and was therefore unnatural. So, although this is not completely unified over an 1,000-year period, this view of good sex and bad sex is pretty consistent. So now we're going to move out of the Middle Ages, and we're going to see some significant changes. And this is some of the work I've been doing lately that I find really exciting that will be in the upcoming book. This slow change of what male and female is and science. It's just really interesting to watch how the views of sexuality and male and female start changing. Very significantly, science and medicine get elevated and they start challenging religious beliefs. We could do the Age of Enlightenment, Age of Reason, but science starts challenging some of the religious beliefs about what causes earthquakes and pandemics and floods and beliefs about the body. Still, there's a standard view of a human body, and it was male, and the substandard view was female. But, hallelujah, thanks to science, we start realizing that a woman is not inferior because her biles, her humors are out of balance. They start to realize, they start to look at the anatomy, and because women were just the inverse of men, and our body parts were just the inverse, even the vagina, which hadn't been named yet, is seen as a female penis. It's just the stuff tucked on the inside. But yay, the vagina's finally going to get a name. So, off script, yesterday, I went to see my gynecologist. And as he's got me draped, I say to him, because, ladies' uncomfortable spot, chit chat. So I say to him, "Oh, Dr. Myron, do you know how the vagina got its name?" Now, he's a man about my age, so he's been around a lot of vaginas, but he said, "No, I don't know how the vagina got its name." So I said, "Would you like to hear?" So he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, in 1681, the vagina was named, but it was still named in relation to a male. The Latin word for vagina means a scabbard or a sheath to a sword. Well, the male's penis was known by the Latin word gladius. So again, we get named in relation to in a substandard way to what a male is. So here is the sword going into our sheath. So the vagina is named the Latin word for sheath." So he looks up at me again and he said, "How do you know this stuff?" I said, "Well, it's kind of what I do. I study Bible and human sexuality." He said, "Do those go together?" I said, "Yes, they interestingly go together." And he said, "You would be an interesting person to have at a party." I said, "Well, keep me on that list for when those parties start up again." But it wasn't, and so vaginas don't get named until 1681, and it wasn't going to be until the 1870s that scientists were even going to realize that the female skeleton was different than the male skeleton. If you looked at an anatomy book before then, you would see human skeleton. That's what it'd be listed as. And then, someone discovered that our bodies are built a little bit differently. And also the same decade, the 1870s, it was discovered that women actually contributed something to the procreation process. We weren't just a planting field where men got to put their seeds, right? So we actually contributed an egg to this process. So the point is that science is quickly changing. So as science is growing, the views of male and female are changing, but still, science will still deem women inferior and weaker and substandard to men. So still, to behave like a woman, to be a woman, would be to be inferior. Um, but things are going to change. The Reformation is going to change some of this stuff. Women are no longer going to be seen as the lusty, out of control sexual ones. Men are going to take that up that banner, and women, their focus is going to be on being maternal. Over this period of time, also, other things are changing. The French Revolution, um, all over Europe, it becomes people have greater freedom to have personal expressions politically and even sexually. So people are starting to be unbound from the monarchy, the church. Science is getting out there. People are becoming more literate. More books and pamphlets are available. These are going to be really important parts because this is how information is not only exchanged, but it's challenged. Thoughts are challenged. So we're going to see the start of modern views of sexuality. Um, I'm trying to think of what to cut. Oh my gosh, I don't want to cut anything. France is one of the first countries to do away with anti-sodomy laws. And a lot of countries on the continent follow. Belgium, the Netherlands. England's kind of off of its own bubble. But what this is going to start is this exchange of ideas. And we're going to see that people, although they understand that male and female are anatomically different, it's going to also, while at the same time we're realizing that, we're seeing pockets of what we would call homosexuals in major cities, in places not only in Europe, but in England and even the United States. But because it becomes more important to be distinguished from these anatomically different females, um, persecution starts. But in England, we see the growth of Molly houses. Now, Molly, you should be making that connection in your head right away. It's the same word as Malakos, effeminate men. We're going to see that change in the Bible in the King James, but there are gathering places. And that happens in the early 1700s. And some of this is happening because the Industrial Revolution happens. You can't just pick up a Bible and read in black and white and say, nothing has happened since the year 50 when Paul wrote those sentences. Nothing has happened to change any of our thinking or understanding. You have to attach history to this. All of these shifts that are happening, and they are not bad. This is human understanding to challenge the myths of the first 1,000 years of the Bible. So Industrial Revolution happens. People are moving into the cities. People are having earned income. They're on their own. They're away from the watchful eyes of their families. They're starting to find new ways to express or think about their own sexuality. So there's this shift that the trusted authorities about sex shift from religion and condemnation to science and observation. And I want to say just very quickly, because it's going to come up in some of the Bible translations, I want to say something about this period of time, the early 1700s, and about masturbation. I talk about all the topics that, it's probably embarrassing poor Buttercup sitting on the other side of the screen. So someone in 1714, a Frenchman, a doctor, writes a pamphlet on the sins of onanism, masturbation. And nobody talked about this before. And what he says is it's this sin that causes degeneracy. If you do this thing, then you're going to end up with warts and cripple, and every kind of sickness is going to come your way. But don't worry, I have the cure for it. And they started selling his cure for it. So when you consider that over 90% of men modern day and 70% of women masturbate, this is kind of a problem. Everybody was doing it, but no one was talking about it. So there becomes this uber focus on masturbation as a non-procreative sex act, which causes all kinds of degeneracies, and eventually it's going to be the cause the perceived cause of homosexuality too. So, and that's going to stay a consistent view until the early 1900s. So a man makes up a problem, sells the cure, everybody plagiarizes this pamphlet, and all of a sudden this thing of masturbation becomes this huge problem that causes people to degenerate. So here we go, come back. So just very quickly as a reminder, share. The middle of the 1800s, this is a huge shift. The authority over sexuality moves from religion and condemnation to science and observation. Really an important statement. Okay, now the next part of human sexuality will seem so odd to us, but we have to start somewhere. The thought about these things starts somewhere. And a guy in 1844, a guy named Heinrich Kahn, he writes a book called Psychopathia Sexualis. And in this book, he tries to figure out the ways in which people are doing sexual perversions. What are the non-procreative ways? Because now we're going from religion and condemnation to science and observation. So he observes, and he's the first to do it. He writes the book in Latin because it's so controversial. And he says, there are 5 ways in which people are doing non-procreative sex. And I'm going to call them out. And he says that pretty much masturbation is the cause of all of them. But masturbation, lesbianism, which is not lesbianism as we understand it today, it's rubbing your genitals on the thighs of another. Bestiality, sex with animals, sodomy, anal sex, or non-procreative sex in general. And oddly, sex with statues. No explanation, but sex with statues. But he concludes that these things are probably caused, the sexual degeneracy is probably caused by coddling your children too much. Again, Malakoi, giving them too soft an existence, wrapping them too warmly when they're children, giving them chocolate, putting them in soft linens. These are the things that cause degeneracy. And so at least he starts the conversation. So I was planning on doing a more extensive view through time, but I will tell you, he starts it. So he starts this conversation of why people seem to be attracted and have sex with the same sex. So for the next 50 years, mostly in Germany, and the reason, or the German Confederation, mostly in this area is because the rest of Europe, including England, have very high and tight censorship laws. And Germany's not doing that. So there are scientists and there are homosexuals that aren't named that yet, that are telling their stories. They're saying, we have these attractions. We're normal people. They publish books and pamphlets that filter out and get to the rest of Europe, and even in England. People end up in jail for selling and owning these books, but they get to England. But there's this general conversation in the next 50 years with some very substantial people. I think, by the way, I wrote a book already. Oh, there it is. What a great book. Chapter 3, there's so much I can't say here, but it'll be more explained in some of it in the next book. But that book there right now, chapter 3, does a really good explanation of this transition of understanding of human sexuality. But they start to debate it. They start to have conversations. Information gets out, science gets out. People start talking about this. People start seeing themselves. They think, I'm the only one. I mean, you think you're the only one? Imagine being in 1870 and being attracted to the same sex. You would definitely think you were the only one. But the information is getting out. So, but what's the cause of it? Is it too much masturbation? Is it that your body parts are deformed? I mean, I could make you laugh hysterically about what they thought about shapes of anuses and shapes of penises that made people homosexuals. Yeah, next book. But so what makes people like that? Do they have a female brain in a male body? What is making this? All this conversation is happening, and it's happening at the end of the 1800s. So scientists, sexologists, new field, are talking about this. What is creating people? What is causing people to become homosexuals? So they come to some conclusions, And some of the most profound conclusions they come to are people just are. It's not a degeneracy of the body. It's not that the body parts are making people do that stuff. It's not that they're masturbating too much. It's not that they got the wrong brain. It's just that people are this way. And next significant thing that happens is Freud comes along in the early 1900s to the 1920s. He unhinges the act of sex from procreation and makes sex for the pleasure of sex okay. So we are about in the 1930s now. But before we get into the Bible, let's go here. Come on. So before we get to where it changes, this is really consistent. The translations of Arsenokoitai and Malakoi are really consistent in the modern English since the 1600s and German Bibles over 18 centuries. Malakoi is going to be translated to effeminate in the King James Version, but I'm going to let you read that list. But essentially, Malakoi is defined as the effeminate, to be like a woman, to be weak, to be lustful. All these different words are used for the word Malakoi, but it basically means to have feminine traits, to be weak. And Arsenokoitai will be translated many different ways. Liars with men, men who lay with boys, boy molesters, Knabenschänders in German, abusers of themselves with mankind. Look at that repeated over and over and over and over again. And abusers of themselves with mankind is code for masturbators. I mean, that word is going to stay in the Catholic Bible until 1967. Arsenokoitai will be masturbators. But as I said, if you've got over 90% of the men masturbating and over 70% of the women masturbating, and you tell them that they're going to go to hell, they're probably not going to end up in your churches being told that they're going to hell every time for masturbating. So you better change the definition of the word. Homosexual is a good one, because your tithing plates are not going to be full, because your churches won't be full. But that's abusers of themselves with mankind. That's code for masturbators. And then people that make women of themselves, men who abuse themselves, soft and cowardly men, and child abusers. Okay. I have dwelled too long on some, but here we are in the 1930s. So here's where we need to be. And I'll probably go 5 minutes over. So when somebody comes back and says, I've got 10, well, okay. When the work starts on translating the RSV, it starts in 1929. But by the time they get to 1 Corinthians, it's 1935 to 37. In the culture and in the world of medicine, the view of homosexuality at the time was that it was a sexual deviance. It was an out of control lust. It was pedophilia. Really consistent to the 1900 years before that. But now, on top of that, for several things, events that will be in the new book, now added to that is that homosexuality is a criminal behavior and a mental illness. So when the team that does the RSV translation looks at those two words in 1935 to 1937, the words that they see, their intention of doing the RSV was to modernize it to English. And they look to the culture and they say, what are the best words that we can use in our understanding today that would mean Malakoi and Arsenokoitai? And they translate, first thing they do, which is egregious, is they combine those two words. One is about immoral character associated with a woman, and the other is about exploitative sex. The words aren't even associated with one another. They're not the same words. They're not linked words. But they combine those two words. So the two words that did mean simple behaviors and exploitative acts, sex acts, that meant that were associated with any man. Any man could do that. Now becomes one type of person, a homosexual. So what was the RSV team thinking? So this is the new work. So Ed, my sweet friend Ed there, Ed Oxford, and I spent 5 days at Yale University looking through the archive notes of the RSV. And we we went back there to try to find their actual translation notes to try to understand how they made that decision. And let me come back. Stop there. So we spent 5 days looking through, and contemporaneous to the times 1935 to 37, we could not find any notes, and they had extensive notes, and they kept everything. We went through 60,000 documents when we were there. It was 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. for 5 days. So we could not find anything that said why they made this decision at all until we came across, screen share. Until we came across a letter written in 1959. And it was written and it was challenging the head of the translation team. And it said to the head of the translation team, I think you made a mistake. I don't think arsenicoitai and malakoi should, first of all, be combined, but I don't think they translate as the word homosexual. And if you don't change that, then forever the Bible will be used as a sacred weapon against the most marginalized and defenseless of people. So we wanted to know, well, let me just come to this. So because it's going from a behavior to a kind of person. Now, just for show and tell, let me come back. Stop. This is a copy of the 1952. So the word was changed in the 1946 version of the New Testament, and then the full Bible was printed in 1952. So this is the 1952 RSV, but that 1946 version was the first place that the word homosexual appeared. So this person challenged what the RSV team had made as their decision, and we could see in the records that the RSV team took that seriously, and there was an exchange of letters back and forth that, and in those letters, the head of the translation team actually said, you know what, you're right, we made a mistake. When we did that translation work in 1935, we should not have translated it that way. But now we are 25 years later. He looks back on that decision. He says, I made a mistake. So again, in 1935, when they made that decision, it seemed right because homosexuality was seen as a sexual deviancy and out of controlled lust, crime, and pedophilia, all those bad things that 1 Corinthians 6 through 9 and 10 is talking about. So he makes the decision that when we next do the review, the revisions, and they do it 30 years after the original work, and there's a reason why they wait so long. Also in the next book, they change arsenicoitai to the word sexual perverts. It's better, but they still got it wrong because the two words, hopefully you will understand that, never should have been combined. Malakoi is a word about overindulgent character. Arsenicoitai is a word about exploitative sex that abuses other people. And not long after that revision, the 1973 APA, American Psychological Association, declared homosexuality no longer a mental illness. It's a normal part of human sexuality. And so if people had respected both science and accurate, orthodox, in context, ancient meanings of words, a superior translation that they should have worked on right then should have been those who use and abuse sex and those who use and abuse others sexually. So the question would be, let me come back here just very briefly. So the question should be, or was for us, who was the person that wrote this letter? So through a friend and working together, we found through a friend, Tina, who was just a miraculous people finder. She's in an interview that I also link in the workshop notes. We found this guy. This guy in the young picture at the age of 21 was the person that wrote the letter to the head of the translation team to challenge them. And 11 months after finding that letter, we found him. So 60 years after he wrote this letter that he thought was his words tossed in the bin, I called him in the morning in August one year and said, are you the guy that wrote this letter? A fabulous story. It's somewhat of the next, it's the thread that goes through the next book. So he was also shocked that his letter was the one that challenged the team to translate the word no longer as homosexual, but now as sexual perverts. Still not really good, but it's better than homosexual. And just because I have to brag, he gave me as a gift this summer his copy of the RSV, where he was first reading and he said, "Oh, that's not right." And I have his copy of the RSV. Look at that. I've got his ordination copy. Jealous, jealous. Okay, so on to the next video again. Quick. So several translations have and paraphrases have used the flawed, wrong RSV as their base text in their work, their translation work. The New American Standard, 1971, the Living Bible in 1971 paraphrase. They added homosexuality in 5 different places. The NIV version of the Bible in 1973-78. But the most egregious of every translation there is out there. Okay, so 1973 has happened. We know homosexuals are not broken people. They're just a part of human sexuality. We should know that those words have been mistranslated by now. Just another little footnote. When Ed and I went to those archives, nobody had gone through those 60,000 sheets of paper and had ever found that challenging letter where the head of the translation team admits that he made a mistake. Somebody should have done this work before us, like maybe a theologian that was translating the Bible. Just a clue. So the most egregious translation of the Bible is the English Standard Version, which began their work in 1990, came out in 2001. It's a Crossways book, Baptist book. Their translation of 6:9 through 10 says, "Men who practice homosexuality." Footnote, 2 Greek terms translated by this phrase refer to the passive and active partners in a consensual sex act. That is not what this means. So I know that was very fast. Thank you, Phil, for keeping up with me. Blah, 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 blah. In the workshop notes, there is a link to the movie, and also Rocky's in the exhibitors hall. There's a documentary being made about all this, and it's coming out next summer about the same time the book will. Everything will come out at the same time. I really encourage you to go to the other linked reference here for the interview that I did with Reverend David at the Reformation Project conference 2 Octobers ago. It is darling. It is sweet. You are going to be so glad that not only did this man live and that we found him, but that he's a gay man. He's a gay man. That he, as a young 21-year-old gay man, had the intellect and courage to challenge the translation team. I love Reverend David. And you know what? Clearly he loves me because I've got his Bible. And please pick up my book, which fills in a lot of this information, because what is going to happen after these translations of the Bible? In the 1980s, early 1990s, religion and politics are going to merge together. You can't have lived the last 4 years and not realize that this is an absolute truth. I say it's like an arsena coite relationship. I give to you, you give to me, and together we screw the world. So that book talks about the religion and politics part. I've also linked really extensive videos online, and they will fill in some of the blanks. So I know I've gone long, but there you go. Lots of information out there. I love this information, but I will tell you, the Bible has been wrongly translated in this verse. It has been used as a sacred weapon. And if Ed and I can do anything to expose the non-academics and sloppiness behind it. One more thing. So as you see this stack of books here, there's 51 books in this stack, and represented by 10 more that I did on digital books. These are all anti-gay books that I've read and reviewed. The reviews are on my website, but recently, Christmas morning at 12:02 in the morning, Amazon wiped out 9 years of history of my reviews because people have been complaining about, the authors of these, the publishers of these have been complaining about my books for years. But if someone hands you a book and you want to know, is it a destructive book or not, go to my website. And I'm going to be fighting this thing, but look at this. And I've got 9 more that I haven't done yet. So anyway, thank you, Phil. Where do I go for questions? Lauren, do I have to pull something up? I have to pull up chat. Okay. Or do I Q&A? Is that what I pull up? Okay. Um, you know what? I will put the PowerPoint on my website. I will host it there. Any passages you know that not only don't no. You know what? Somebody asked, are there relationships that would celebrate same-sex verses that would celebrate same-sex relationships? The easiest and not snarky answer is there are no New Testament verses that celebrate passion and desire in sex. Paul is not what you would call sex positive. As I said, sex positive came in the 4th century when they realized that they better get people having sex to make babies. So no. And there would have been no understanding of heterosexual, homosexual. No. So when people say, I have to see this verse to approve of same-sex relationships, not going to get it. Book was written 2,000 years ago, no concept of same-sex attraction again until the beginning of the 1900s. Can everybody see? Da, 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 da. Great job. Yay. Let's see what else is in here. I think really the best translation of the verse is from the Message. Those that use and abuse sex, those that use and abuse others. The notes, I don't know where the notes are hidden. I guess they'll come up. I submitted them. How would you start a conversation with folks who believe that harmful traditional positions about marriage, gender, sexual? Okay, I get asked this a lot. This is just me. I don't start with the Bible. I start having conversations with people about what they understand about human sexuality, about the history of it, about how do they even know why homosexuality at one point was considered a mental illness. I think I've linked that article there that I've written there too. I start with territory that is safer to walk on before I challenge people's scriptural beliefs. And what I try to do with even this broad teaching of what has affected the interpretations of the Bible and how we've come to discriminate against people is I go through this very broad area, and my hope is that in giving you all this stuff, somewhere in your mind that only knows black and white, you'll say, I never knew that. That sounds right. She might be right. Maybe I should listen a little further, because all I'm looking for is the tiniest of cracks in your sureness. And my experience says that does not start with challenging people's biblical views, because they don't even understand where those translations came from. They don't understand the context of these verses. So I kind of walk around on the safer, more interesting territory before I zero in and say, well, what do you think of this? So it's just the way I work it. And I'm hoping that, so the book that Ed and I are writing together, Forging a Sacred Weapon, How the Bible Became Anti-Gay, that people will have vast amounts of information. And no, I don't expect you to know all these ins and outs, but if I give it to you, maybe you'll learn some of it so that you can have conversations with people that start with, did you know? Have you heard? And then, so my 2 methods are education and absolutely relationships, because that's how I came into this, right? I was really staunchly evangelical, Republican voting until Obama, Christian homeschooling mom, those poor children. And I figured it out. I learned, I changed. So I believe in education and relationship. And I am so grateful to have Ed Oxford by my side. He's going to be doing a lot of the Bible part where we together, and the thing is, we're just really ordinary people. And isn't that so God that He picked really ordinary people to do this work? Those letters have been sitting there for over 70 years. They were just waiting to be found. David was waiting to be found. So it's the time. The time is now. And thank you, Rocky, for getting all the work done on this documentary. Good things are happening. Good things are happening. Okay, I could go on, but I need to look at questions. Um, okay, do I have it? Can you go to Alabama and tell my aunt all of this? Well, you like maybe after the pandemic is over, and like if you buy me a ticket, and if I don't have to drink sweet tea, all of those. I have like a lot of conditions on my travel. What do I do? What do I do now? I think I'm over. And I've been told I can do a hangout later. Not that I have it figured out yet, but somewhere in the community notes, I'll post a hangout that maybe you can ask your other questions. And I will be at bingo tonight. And I know a lot of you know my mother, Buttercup. She's a branded woman. I'm not like branded one. She's got a brand now. She'll be at bingo with me if you'd like to meet her. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, and if you want the newsletter for the progress on this, sign up for, send an email to newsletters@canyonwalkerconnections.com. Thank you. Thank you. There were so many wonderful choices this afternoon. Thanks for spending time with me. I do appreciate it. Thank you.